The HOA president called the police and accused my wife of being a prostitute for walking into our own home. Red and blue lights flooded our driveway like a raid. Doors flew open up and down the street. Neighbors poured out to watch the show. 3 officers stepped onto my porch, hands near their holsters, treating our home like a crime scene. "Ma'am, we need you to step outside," one called toward the door. On the lawn, the HOA president stood with her arms crossed, smiling like she'd won. "That's her," she said. "The suspicious woman." My wife stepped outside, calm, silent. The lead officer looked at her, then froze. In that moment, I watched the HOA president's smile disappear, because she'd just set in motion events she could never undo. And the next time she saw my wife wouldn't be on a front porch. It would be behind a judge's bench. Comment where you're watching from and subscribe. Let me take you back to where this all started, because Derek Castellano's story isn't just about HOA drama. It's about a man who thought he'd lost his chance at happiness, only to find it again in the most unexpected way. Derek's 52, a union electrician with calloused hands and a back that reminds him daily about that fall from a scaffold 6 months ago. The smell of sawdust still clings to his workshop, where he builds furniture late into the night. Not because he has to, but because keeping his hands busy helps quiet the memories of watching his first wife, Emma, waste away from cancer 8 years ago. Those were dark years. Single father to teenage Jake, working double shifts to pay medical bills that kept coming even after Emma was gone. Derek thought he was done with love, done with hope. Then Sarah walked into his life at a community college electrical safety seminar, asking smart questions about ground fault interrupters that made him look twice. Sarah Martinez, well, Sarah Castellano now, was everything Derek never expected to find again. Intelligent, kind, with a laugh that could fill the empty spaces in his chest. What Derek didn't know during their quiet courthouse wedding 3 months ago was that Sarah had just been appointed to something that would change everything. Municipal judge for their county district. She deliberately kept work separate during their honeymoon period. Call it professional caution or newlywed bliss, but Sarah wanted their first months of marriage to be about them, not about the gavel she'd soon be carrying. Meanwhile, in the perfectly manicured hellscape known as Riverside Heights HOA, Constance Palmridge was building her empire of petty tyranny. For 6 years, she'd ruled their 180-home community like a suburban dictator, her professional camera always ready to document violations, her shrill voice echoing across courtyards during her daily inspections. The crunch of perfectly maintained gravel under her feet had become the soundtrack of fear for residents who dared step out of line. Karen, because, let's be honest, Constance was always a Karen at heart, had a special talent for targeting anyone she deemed inappropriate for their community. Working-class families, single parents, anyone who might lower property values by existing while not wealthy enough. Her retirement from real estate had only intensified her obsession with maintaining standards. What residents didn't know was that Karen's own house was a monument to hypocrisy. Behind her perfect facade, she was running an illegal Airbnb operation, collecting cash payments she'd never reported to the IRS, and racking up code violations faster than she could write citations for her neighbors. The trouble started the second week of October, right after Sarah began moving her things from her downtown apartment. Picture this. Sarah, pulling into Derek's driveway at 10:30 p.m. after a long day setting up her new courtroom, arms full of law books and judicial robes still in their garment bags. She's tired, she's happy to be home, and she has no idea that across the street Karen's watching through binoculars like some suburban spy. See, Sarah's schedule was unpredictable those first weeks. Court ran late, she had judicial training sessions, and sometimes she'd grab dinner downtown before heading home. To normal people, this would look like a busy professional adjusting to married life. To Karen, this looked like evidence of something sinister. The night it all went sideways, Sarah was carrying in her new computer setup when 2 Phoenix PD cruisers rolled up, their red and blue lights painting Derek's driveway like a crime scene. The metallic taste of fear filled Derek's mouth as officers approached his front door, hands resting on their duty belts. "We got a call about suspicious activity," the lead officer explained, his voice professional but cautious. "Someone reported a woman entering this property at unusual hours." Derek's face burned with humiliation as neighbors emerged from their homes like prairie dogs sensing drama. There was Sarah, still holding her laptop bag, looking between Derek and the officers with the kind of confusion that comes from being treated like a criminal in your own driveway. And there, across the street, stood Karen in her designer robe, arms crossed with satisfaction, watching the show she'd orchestrated. But here's what Karen didn't realize as she savored her moment of power. She'd just made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. Because in about 6 weeks, she'd be standing in a courtroom, and the woman she'd just humiliated would be the one wearing the black robes. The police left that night with apologies, but the damage was done. Derek lay awake listening to Sarah's quiet breathing, his mind racing with the kind of anger that builds when someone attacks the thing you love most. By morning, he'd made a decision. Karen Palmridge had picked the wrong family to mess with. 3 days later, the first official shot was fired. Derek found the violation notice tucked under his windshield wiper like a parking ticket from hell. Notice of violation, multiple unauthorized vehicles, fine, $800. The letter, typed on official HOA letterhead with Karen's signature sprawled across the bottom, claimed Derek's work truck violated the community's commercial vehicle prohibition. Never mind that Derek had been parking that same Ford F-250 in his driveway for 3 years without a peep. Never mind that the HOA bylaws specifically allowed one work vehicle if properly registered. What really burned Derek's ass was the timing. Karen had been sitting on this violation for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The police incident had given her the excuse she needed. $800, Derek muttered, reading the notice to Sarah over breakfast. The diesel smell from his truck still lingered in the garage, the same smell Karen claimed polluted the air quality of their pristine neighborhood. For Derek, this wasn't just about money, though $800 might as well have been $8,000. His workers' comp claim was still grinding through bureaucratic hell, and side electrical jobs were the only thing keeping their heads above water. That truck wasn't just transportation. It was his livelihood loaded with tools worth more than most people's cars. Sarah watched her husband's jaw tighten as he read the violation notice. She could have ended this with a single phone call, could have mentioned her new position and watched Karen backpedal faster than a cyclist going downhill. But Sarah had spent her career building a reputation for integrity, and she wasn't about to compromise it now. Besides, Derek needed to fight this battle himself. She could see it in the way his shoulders straightened when he talked about researching the bylaws. "You know what?" Derek said, folding the notice with deliberate precision. "I think it's time I learned exactly what rules Karen's been playing by." That afternoon, Derek drove to the community center library, a dingy building that smelled like old carpet and forgotten dreams. For 4 hours, he read every page of the Riverside Heights HOA covenants, bylaws, and architectural guidelines. His electrician's brain, trained to trace complex wiring problems, began mapping the logical inconsistencies in Karen's enforcement patterns. The breakthrough came when Derek cross-referenced the commercial vehicle policy with the community's business registration database. See, HOA presidents weren't just volunteer positions. They had legal obligations, including maintaining accurate records of any business activities within the community. What Derek found made him laugh out loud in the quiet library. Karen's own property was listed as having 4 vehicles regularly parked on the street: her BMW, her husband's Mercedes, and 2 rotating guest cars that belonged to her Airbnb customers. According to the same bylaws she'd used to fine Derek, each of those street-parked vehicles was a $50 per day violation. Derek started taking pictures. Every morning on his way to physical therapy, he'd drive past Karen's house with his phone ready. Monday, silver Honda with out-of-state plates. Tuesday, red pickup truck parked half on the sidewalk. Wednesday, some kind of modified muscle car that probably violated the noise ordinance just by existing. The mini twist came on Thursday morning when Derek's newly installed security camera caught something beautiful. Karen herself, at 2:15 a.m., dragging a garden hose across her yard to water the decorative rocks near Derek's property line. Not suspicious in itself, until you realize those rocks hadn't been watered once in the 3 years Derek had lived there. She was creating her evidence. All those noise complaints about Sarah's late-night activities. Karen was making the sounds herself, then filing reports the next morning about the disturbances she'd caused. Derek saved that video file with a smile. Karen had taught him something valuable about documentation. As his old union rep used to say, if you're gonna fight the boss, make sure you've got better records than they do. Now Derek had a decision to make: play by Karen's rules or start playing by his own. Karen's next move came at the monthly HOA meeting, and it was a masterpiece of suburban psychological warfare. Derek walked into this community center's musty conference room to find Karen holding court like a prosecuting attorney, a manila folder thick with evidence spread across the table in front of her. "Before we address Mr. Castellano's appeal," Karen announced, her voice carrying that special tone people use when they're about to drop what they think is a bombshell, "I believe the board should be made aware of some concerning developments regarding the situation at 1247 Maple Drive." The way she said situation made it sound like Derek was harboring a meth lab instead of a loving wife. "It's come to my attention," Karen continued, pulling out a stack of photographs like a suburban CSI investigator, "that Mr. Castellano is allowing an unregistered individual to cohabitate in his residence. Multiple neighbors have reported a woman entering and leaving the property at all hours, often accompanied by different vehicles." Derek felt heat rise in his chest. The unregistered individual was his wife of 3 months, and those different vehicles were Sarah's Honda and her friend's car from when they'd moved her law books. "I'm calling for a formal investigation into whether Mr. Castellano is running an unauthorized business or housing situation that violates our community standards," Karen declared, her designer reading glasses perched like a weapon on her nose. 3 of the 7 board members nodded along like bobbleheads. These were Karen's people, retirees who'd been bullied into submission years ago and now mistook her authority for actual leadership. But Derek was ready. He stood up slowly, his back protesting the movement, and pulled out his own folder. "Before we get to that," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, "I'd like to discuss some violations I've documented over the past 2 weeks." He laid out his photos methodically. Karen's property with 4 cars parked illegally on the street, timestamp after timestamp showing systematic violations of the same parking policies she'd used to fine him. "According to Section 4.2 of our bylaws," Derek read from his highlighted copy, "street parking is limited to 2 vehicles per household for a maximum of 48 hours. Mrs. Palmridge's property has exceeded this limit every day this month." Karen's face went through several interesting color changes as Derek continued his presentation. The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the scent of panic setting in, but Derek wasn't done. He pulled out his marriage certificate, holding it up for the room to see. "As for the unregistered individual, this is my wife, Sarah Castellano. We were married on July 15th of this year, and she's been in the process of moving in from her downtown apartment." The room went quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 3 neighbors Derek had spoken to, Tom and Linda Morrison, plus elderly Betty Kowalski, shifted in their seats with knowing looks. That's when Karen made her tactical error. Instead of backing down gracefully, she doubled down with the kind of desperation that makes people say things they can't take back. "Marriage certificate or not," she snapped, her professional composure cracking like old paint, "this woman's behavior is suspicious. Legitimate wives don't sneak around at midnight carrying mysterious packages." "Those mysterious packages were law books," Derek replied, his voice dangerously calm. "My wife is a professional who works late hours. But since we're talking about suspicious midnight activity..." Derek pulled out his phone and opened the security camera app. The room watched in fascination as he played footage of Karen creeping around her yard at 2:15 a.m., garden hose in hand, watering decorative rocks that hadn't seen moisture since the Clinton administration. "This was taken last Thursday night," Derek explained. "Funny thing is, Friday morning you filed a noise complaint about disturbances in that exact area." The mini twist hit Karen like a slap. She'd been so focused on building a case against Derek that she hadn't considered he might be building one against her. The realization dawned across her face like a slow-motion car crash. But Karen had spent 6 years as HOA president for a reason. She recovered quickly, her political instincts kicking in. "This is clearly a personal vendetta," she declared, gathering her papers with shaking hands. "Mr. Castellano is trying to deflect from his own violations by making wild accusations." She looked around the room with the desperation of a cornered animal. "I move that we table this discussion until Mr. Castellano can provide proper documentation for his wife's residency status." Derek smiled. Karen had just given him exactly what he needed. Time to dig deeper. Because while she'd been playing amateur detective, Derek had been learning something that would change everything. His wife wasn't just any professional who worked late hours. Sarah was the new municipal judge, and every legal weapon Karen might try to use against them would eventually land on Sarah's desk. Karen had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who could destroy her with a single gavel strike. 3 weeks after the HOA meeting, Karen played her nuclear card, and Derek learned exactly how far a desperate person will go to maintain control. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, jarring Derek awake with the kind of urgency that makes your heart skip beats. "Derek, this is Officer Martinez with Phoenix PD," the voice said, professional but tinged with something that might have been sympathy. "We've received a report of domestic violence at your address. We need to respond to the call." Derek's blood turned to ice water. Through the bedroom window, he could see Karen standing in her front yard, still in her bathrobe, phone pressed to her ear as she gestured dramatically toward his house. "There's been a mistake," Derek said, his voice hoarse from sleep and rising panic. "There's no domestic violence here. My wife's still asleep." "Sir, I understand this might be confusing, but we have to investigate all reports. Can you step outside so we can talk?" 5 minutes later, Derek found himself in handcuffs on his own front lawn while 2 patrol officers searched his house. The metallic taste of fear filled his mouth as neighbors emerged from their homes like spectators at a train wreck. Jake, visiting for the weekend, watched from the living room window with the kind of wide-eyed terror that would probably require therapy later. The worst part wasn't the humiliation or even the legal implications. The worst part was watching Sarah emerge from the house in her pajamas, trying to explain to the officers that she was fine, that there had been no violence, while Derek stood helpless in restraints that bit into his wrists like accusatory teeth. "Ma'am, did this man threaten or harm you in any way?" Officer Martinez asked Sarah, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Absolutely not," Sarah replied, her judicial training keeping her voice steady despite the chaos. "This is my husband, and he's never laid a hand on me. Someone has made a false report." It took 45 minutes for the officers to complete their investigation, 45 minutes during which Derek's workers' compensation case hung in the balance like a sword over his neck. Any hint of violence, any suggestion of instability, and his claim would evaporate faster than water on Phoenix asphalt. The body camera footage later revealed Karen's performance worthy of an Oscar nomination. She'd told dispatch that she'd heard screaming and crashing sounds from Derek's house, that she was afraid for the woman's safety, and that Derek had a history of threatening behavior. None of it was true, but lies travel faster than truth when they're dressed in concern for public safety. After the police left, Derek sat in his workshop surrounded by the smell of motor oil and old wood, his hands shaking too badly to hold his coffee cup steady. That's when Sarah made a decision that probably violated every judicial ethics guideline in the book. She sat down next to her husband on his workbench, careful not to touch the multimeter he was unconsciously gripping like a security blanket, and said something that changed everything. "Derek, I think it's time you knew exactly who you married." And Sarah explained about her appointment to municipal court, about the cases she'd be hearing, about the jurisdiction that covered everything from HOA violations to restraining orders to harassment charges. She explained it all in the kind of calm, measured tone that would later serve her well in courtroom proceedings. "I can't get involved directly," Sarah said, watching Derek's face cycle through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been hope. "But you should know that Karen's building a legal case she can't win, using tactics that could land her in serious trouble." Derek's electrician brain, trained to trace complex problems back to their source, began mapping the implications. Every legal weapon Karen might deploy, restraining orders, harassment claims, nuisance suits, would eventually cross Sarah's desk. The mini-twist revealed itself that afternoon when Derek's attorney, Lisa Wren, called with news that made him laugh for the first time in weeks. The body camera footage clearly showed Karen escalating the confrontation outside Derek's house 3 days earlier, contradicting her claims that Derek had threatened her. Better yet, the audio had captured something Karen didn't know she'd said. "I'll make sure you regret moving here." Not exactly the words of someone afraid for her safety. Derek spent the rest of the weekend installing a professional-grade security system with cloud backup storage. If Karen wanted to play evidence games, he'd make sure every pixel was preserved in high definition. His electrical knowledge came in handy as he ran concealed cables through PVC conduit, creating a surveillance network that would make the CIA proud. As Derek tested camera angles and motion sensors, he realized something that made him smile for the first time in weeks. Karen had been playing checkers while he learned chess, and now he had a chess master for a wife who understood the rules better than anyone. The stage was set for the final act, and Karen had no idea she'd just handed Derek the perfect trap. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor so twisted it makes you question whether cosmic justice actually exists. Derek discovered this on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, sitting in his workshop with Sarah's laptop open to the Maricopa County Superior Court website, searching for anything that might help their legal situation. What he found made him stare at the screen for a full minute, blinking like a man trying to process a winning lottery ticket. "New judicial appointments announced," read the headline from 3 weeks earlier. Below it, a professional headshot of his wife smiled back at him, accompanied by text that made Derek's heart race. "The Honorable Sarah Castellano has been appointed to serve as municipal court judge for District 4, with jurisdiction including all HOA violation appeals, restraining order hearings, small claims disputes, and harassment cases within the Phoenix metropolitan area." Derek read the announcement twice, then 3 times, before the full implications hit him like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. Every single legal weapon Karen might try to use against them, restraining orders, harassment claims, even traffic violations, would land on Sarah's desk. "Sarah!" Derek called out, his voice cracking with something between laughter and disbelief. "You need to see this." Sarah appeared in the workshop doorway, still wearing her business suit from court, and saw Derek pointing at her own appointment announcement like a man who'd discovered fire. "When exactly were you planning to mention this?" Derek asked, his tone somewhere between amazed and exasperated. Sarah's cheeks reddened. "I wanted to keep work separate during our first months together, and then Karen started her campaign, and I couldn't say anything because it would create a conflict of interest." She paused, studying Derek's expression. "Are you upset?" Derek stood up slowly, his back protesting, and walked to where his wife stood framed in the doorway. "Upset?" "Sarah, Karen spent 3 weeks building a case that's going to end up in front of the one person in this entire county who has every reason to see through her bullshit." The ethical implications were tricky, Sarah explained as they sat together on Derek's workbench, surrounded by the comfortable smells of sawdust and electrical equipment. A sitting judge couldn't preside over cases involving immediate family members. But harassment directed at the judge's spouse was different territory entirely. "If Karen files any legal action against you or me," Sarah said, her voice taking on the measured tone she'd use later in actual proceedings, "I'll need to evaluate whether I can remain impartial, but if she's targeting us specifically because of who we are..." Derek's mind raced through the possibilities. Municipal court judges handled everything from noise violations to restraining orders. They had the power to issue fines, order community service, and even refer cases for criminal prosecution. Karen had been wielding HOA authority like a weapon, but real legal authority was something else entirely. "She has no idea who you are," Derek said, understanding dawning like sunrise. "To Karen, you're just the suspicious woman who moved in with the electrician." Sarah nodded. "The appointment was announced while we were on our honeymoon. Local news covered it for about 12 hours, then moved on. Unless someone was specifically looking for municipal court news." Derek pulled up Karen's Facebook page, scrolling through 3 weeks of posts about maintaining community standards and protecting property values. Not a single mention of the new judge appointment, not even a shared article from local news. Karen Palmridge, for all her suburban surveillance skills, had completely missed the most important piece of information in her entire HOA career. "So what happens now?" Derek asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Now we wait," Sarah replied, her judicial training evident in every word. "Karen's building towards something, probably a restraining order or harassment charges. When she files that paperwork, when she walks into my courtroom expecting to find some pushover judge who'll be intimidated by her HOA president status." Derek finished the thought. "She's going to find you instead." The beauty of the situation was almost artistic in its symmetry. Karen had spent months trying to drive them out of the neighborhood through false reports, harassment, and legal intimidation. Every single one of those tactics would now backfire with the force of cosmic karma. Derek spent the rest of the evening creating a timeline of Karen's harassment campaign, cross-referencing dates with security footage and HOA violation notices. What emerged was a pattern of escalating abuse that would make any reasonable judge very interested in discussing consequences. But the most beautiful part, the detail that made Derek smile every time he thought about it, was the complete surprise factor. Karen would walk into that courtroom confident, prepared, maybe even smug. She'd present her case to what she assumed would be a sympathetic ear, ready to finally rid herself of the troublesome neighbors. Instead, she'd find herself face to face with the woman she'd been trying to destroy, armed with 3 months of documented evidence and the full authority of the court system. It was going to be beautiful. The next 2 weeks transformed Derek's workshop from a place of simple repairs into something resembling mission control for suburban warfare. The smell of PVC cement mixed with coffee as Derek worked late into the nights, his injured back protesting every bend and twist, but his mind sharper than it had been in months. Sarah had been clear about the ethical boundaries. She couldn't coach Derek on legal strategy, couldn't tell him what evidence would be most compelling, couldn't even hint at what Karen might face if she continued down her current path. But she could, as any wife might, listen to her husband process his thoughts out loud while he worked on their home security system. "You know what I learned in my electrician training?" Derek said one evening, threading camera cables through freshly installed PVC conduit. "Every system needs proper grounding, or the whole thing becomes dangerous." Sarah, grading paperwork at the kitchen table, hummed in agreement. Interesting how that applies to so many things. Derek's security upgrade was a masterpiece of electrical engineering disguised as home improvement. 8 4K cameras with night vision capabilities, motion-activated spotlights that could illuminate his entire property, and a cloud backup system that would preserve evidence even if someone tried to destroy the physical devices. Every cable was protected in conduit, every connection weatherproofed, every angle carefully calculated to capture maximum detail. The key with 4K resolution, Derek explained to Tom Morrison, who'd stopped by to admire the installation, is that you can read license plates from 100 feet away, crucial for documentation. Tom nodded appreciatively, then lowered his voice. Betty Kowalski mentioned she's been recording Karen's threats on her phone. Old lady's got more tech skills than people think. That revelation led to an evening meeting in Betty's living room, where the 78-year-old widow revealed a smartphone full of audio recordings that would make a professional investigator jealous. Karen had been making threats and spreading lies for years, but nobody had ever bothered to document it properly until now. I started recording after she tried to get my grandson banned from visiting, Betty explained, her voice steady despite the subject matter. Claimed his motorcycle violated noise ordinances, but only when he came to help with my groceries. Derek's coalition was growing. 3 families who'd been terrorized by Karen's selective enforcement, each with their own documentation, all ready to stand up when the moment came. Linda Morrison had kept meticulous records of every HOA violation notice, cross-referenced with photographs proving selective enforcement. Tom had documented Karen's own property violations going back 18 months. The financial investigation proved even more interesting. Derek's research into public property records revealed that Karen owned 3 rental properties, generating an estimated $15,000 annually in unreported income. Her main house had been modified with an illegal apartment that violated zoning restrictions, fire codes, and tax assessments. Here's something most people don't know, Derek told his growing alliance during one of their evening strategy sessions. Property tax records are public information. If someone's running rental properties but not declaring the income, you can usually find the evidence in county databases. The technical preparation was only half the battle. Derek needed to be ready for whatever legal action Karen might take, and that meant understanding the system she was about to weaponize against herself. Sarah's evening routine provided subtle education. She'd discuss her day in general terms, mentioning how municipal court handled different types of cases, what evidence was most compelling, how judges evaluated harassment patterns. Never specific advice, just the kind of conversation any couple might have about their work. Restraining orders require clear and convincing evidence, Sarah might mention while folding laundry. Judges look for documented patterns, credible witnesses, and whether the petitioner has clean hands, meaning they haven't been engaging in the same behavior they're complaining about. Derek absorbed every detail like a sponge, cross-referencing Sarah's casual observations with his growing evidence file. Karen's harassment campaign was actually building a perfect case against herself. The timeline strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Let Karen make the next move. She was clearly building towards some kind of legal action, probably a restraining order combined with harassment charges. When she filed that paperwork, when she committed to a courtroom battle, the trap would spring with the force of a perfectly wired electrical system. Derek's workshop now contained 3 filing cabinets full of documentation: Karen's violations, audio recordings, security footage, financial records, and witness statements. Every piece of evidence was organized chronologically, labeled clearly, and backed up in multiple locations. "You know what this reminds me of?" Derek told Sarah one evening as he added another folder to his collection. "Building a circuit. Every connection has to be perfect, every wire properly rated, every junction box grounded. One mistake and the whole system fails." Sarah smiled, recognizing the metaphor. "And when someone tries to overload the system?" "Circuit breaker trips," Derek replied, "protects everything downstream from damage." Karen was about to learn what happens when you try to overload a system that's been properly protected. Karen's desperation manifested on December 15th with the kind of bureaucratic precision that made Derek almost admire her commitment to self-destruction. The certified letter arrived at 9:23 a.m., delivered by a postal worker who looked apologetic about carrying what was clearly bad news. "Petition for order of protection," Derek read aloud, the legal language dense as concrete but the implications crystal clear. Karen was seeking a restraining order against both Derek and Sarah, claiming they were engaging in a campaign of stalking, intimidation, and harassment designed to drive petitioner from her home. The petition was a work of fiction worthy of a creative writing award. According to Karen's sworn statement, Derek had been conducting surveillance of her property, following her vehicle, and making threatening gestures during neighborhood encounters. Sarah was accused of loitering near Karen's home and using her position of authority to intimidate a senior citizen. What position of authority? Derek almost laughed reading that line. Karen still had no idea who Sarah actually was. The petition requested an emergency hearing, citing immediate danger to petitioner's physical and emotional well-being. Karen had scheduled her appearance for 10 a.m. on December 22nd, exactly 1 week away. She'd even included a witness list, 3 HOA board members who'd apparently agreed to testify about Derek's escalating aggressive behavior. Derek found Sarah in the kitchen, reviewing case files for the following week's docket, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made notes in careful legal script. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that Karen's petition might very well end up in Sarah's courtroom. "She's really doing this," Derek said, sliding the petition across the counter. "Full restraining order, emergency hearing, the works." Sarah read the document with the dispassionate attention of someone trained to evaluate evidence. Her expression remained neutral, but Derek caught the slight tightening around her eyes when she reached Karen's description of Sarah as someone who appears to be masquerading as a professional while actually being Derek's live-in girlfriend engaged in suspicious activities. "Interesting legal theory," Sarah said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Filing false statements in a petition for protection is perjury. Class 6 felony in Arizona." Derek spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled calm that surprised even him. Instead of panic, he felt the kind of focused determination that came from finally seeing the endgame approaching. Karen had committed herself to a courtroom battle she couldn't possibly win, and Derek was ready to let her hang herself with her own legal rope. The mini twist came on December 18th. When Derek's attorney Lisa Wren called with news that made the entire situation even more delicious. Karen had been busy behind the scenes, not just building her restraining order case, but also filing complaints with Derek's workers' compensation insurer, claiming his aggressive behavior indicated psychological instability that should disqualify his injury claim. "She's trying to hit you from multiple directions," Lisa explained during their phone consultation. "Classic intimidation strategy. Make the cost of fighting higher than the cost of surrendering." But Karen had made a crucial miscalculation. Her workers' comp complaint required sworn statements about Derek's mental state, statements that would become evidence of malicious prosecution when her restraining order petition inevitably collapsed. Derek documented everything with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 30 years troubleshooting electrical problems. Every conversation with investigators, every phone call from insurance adjusters, every piece of paperwork generated by Karen's campaign got filed, photographed, and uploaded to his cloud storage system. The beauty of Karen's strategy was also its fatal flaw. She was creating an official paper trail of her own malicious intent. Every false statement, every exaggerated claim, every piece of manufactured evidence would become exhibit material in her own prosecution. Meanwhile, Derek's coalition of neighborhood allies grew stronger. Betty Kowalski had recruited 2 more families with their own Karen horror stories. Tom Morrison had connected with a former HOA board member who'd resigned rather than enable Karen's increasingly authoritarian behavior. Linda Morrison had been in touch with families who'd actually moved away because of Karen's harassment. "You know what Karen never understood?" Betty said during one of their evening strategy sessions, her voice carrying the wisdom of 7 decades. "Fear only works when people don't have anything left to lose. Once you take everything from someone, they stop being afraid." Derek realized that's exactly what had happened. Karen's campaign had already cost him his peace of mind, threatened his marriage, jeopardized his income, and humiliated him in front of his neighbors. There was literally nothing left for her to take, except his home itself, and Derek would fight to his last breath before letting that happen. On December 21st, the evening before Karen's hearing, Derek organized his evidence one final time. 3 binders of documentation, 8 thumb drives of video footage, witness statements from 6 neighbors, and financial records proving Karen's own violations of the same rules she'd used to persecute others. Tomorrow, Karen would walk into a courtroom expecting to find a sympathetic judge who'd help her rid herself of troublesome neighbors. Instead, she'd find justice wearing Sarah's face. The morning of December 22nd dawned crisp and clear in Phoenix, the kind of winter day that makes people understand why others leave snow country behind. Derek woke before his alarm, his nervous energy mixing with something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Today, Karen Palmridge would finally meet the woman she'd been trying to destroy for 3 months. Karen arrived at the Maricopa County Municipal Court building at 9:15 a.m., 45 minutes early, and dressed like she was attending a board meeting at Goldman Sachs. Designer suit, leather briefcase that probably cost more than Derek's monthly mortgage, and an entourage of 3 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Derek watched from his truck in the parking lot as Karen held court on the courthouse steps, gesturing dramatically while explaining to local Channel 12 News why she'd been forced to seek legal protection from neighborhood terrorists. The reporter looked skeptical, but Karen was too focused on her performance to notice. "This is about more than one household," Karen declared to the camera, her voice carrying the righteous indignation of someone who'd convinced herself she was the victim. "This is about protecting our entire community from people who don't respect our values." The irony was so thick Derek could have cut it with his wire strippers. Inside the courthouse, Derek found Lisa Wren waiting with a single manila folder that contained 3 months of Karen's self-incriminating evidence. "You ready for this?" his attorney asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "I've been ready since the night she called the cops on my wife," Derek replied, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. The courtroom was busier than Derek expected. Besides Karen's crew and Derek's witnesses, about 20 other people filled the gallery. Neighbors, courthouse regulars, and a few people Derek didn't recognize, who looked like they might be journalists or legal students. Karen swept into the courtroom like she owned it, her confidence radiating from every click of her expensive heels on the polished floor. She arranged her materials at the plaintiff's table with the precision of a military operation, clearly expecting to overwhelm whatever overworked municipal judge had drawn her case. "She has no idea," Betty Kowalski whispered from the row behind Derek, her voice carrying barely contained glee. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., the bailiff called the courtroom to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Sarah Castellano." Derek turned to watch Karen's reaction and saw the exact moment recognition hit her brain like a freight train carrying karma. Karen's mouth dropped open, her carefully arranged papers scattered as she half rose from her chair, and her face cycled through confusion, recognition, and raw panic in the space of 3 seconds. "Your Honor," Karen stammered, her voice cracking like a teenager's, "there's been some kind of mistake. This is the woman I'm filing against." Sarah, resplendent in her black judicial robes, looked down at Karen with the kind of professional composure that comes from years of courtroom experience. "Mrs. Palmridge, I am your honor, and you have just filed a petition for a restraining order against a sitting municipal court judge." The courtroom went silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the sound of Karen's legal strategy imploding like a controlled demolition. I didn't know. Karen whispered, her designer briefcase falling from nerveless fingers to hit the floor with a sound like a gavel striking justice. "Ignorance of judicial identity is not a defense for filing false charges," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the authority of the entire court system. "However, we will proceed with your petition as filed. Please state your case, Mrs. Palmridge." What followed was 15 minutes of the most beautiful legal self-destruction Derek had ever witnessed. Karen, her confidence completely shattered, stumbled through her prepared statement while Derek's evidence systematically demolished every claim she'd made. Security footage showed Karen creating the disturbances she'd reported. Audio recordings revealed her threats and false statements. Financial documents proved her own violations of the same HOA rules she'd used to persecute others. Witness after witness testified about Karen's pattern of harassment targeting families she deemed inappropriate for the neighborhood. The mini-twist came when Sarah asked to see Karen's evidence of Derek's alleged stalking and intimidation. Karen's professional surveillance photos turned out to be blurry cell phone pictures taken through her bedroom window while she hid behind curtains like some suburban spy. "Mrs. Palmridge," Sarah said, her judicial tone carrying undertones that promised consequences, "it appears you have filed a petition containing multiple false statements against a county employee and his spouse. The court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible perjury charges." Derek sat quietly through it all, watching 3 months of harassment and intimidation collapse under the weight of actual justice. Karen's restraining order was denied, her petition dismissed with prejudice, and her legal costs assigned to Derek's attorney fees. But the most satisfying moment came when Sarah addressed the courtroom directly. "Let the record reflect that filing false charges against judicial officers and their families is a serious crime that this court will prosecute to the full extent of the law." Karen left the courtroom in tears, her entourage scattering like cockroaches when the lights come on. Derek stayed behind to shake hands with his witnesses and thank his attorney, but mostly to watch justice being served with a side of cosmic irony. The courtroom on December 22nd was about to witness justice with a side of cosmic irony. Derek sat at the defendant's table, his evidence organized in neat binders, while Karen Palmridge arranged her materials with the confidence of someone who had no idea she was walking into her own trap. The gallery was surprisingly full. Word had spread through Riverside Heights. The HOA queen was finally taking someone to court. Tom and Linda Morrison sat in the front row with Betty Kowalski and 3 other families who'd been Karen's victims. Even a Phoenix New Times reporter had slipped in, drawn by tips about a suburban justice story. Karen's confidence was magnificent to behold. She wore her most expensive suit, carried a designer briefcase, and had brought 3 HOA board members as witnesses. That morning, she'd even called Channel 12 News, declaring she was seeking legal protection from neighborhood terrorists who don't respect community values. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Sarah Castellano," the bailiff announced. What happened next was worth every moment of Derek's 3-month nightmare. Karen rose from her chair with practiced ease, ready to present her case to whatever overworked municipal judge had drawn her petition. She'd prepared for this moment for weeks. Then Sarah entered in her black judicial robes. The recognition hit Karen's face like a physical blow. Her mouth dropped open, her carefully arranged papers scattered from nerveless fingers, and she made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a death rattle as her brain processed the impossible. "Your Honor," Karen stammered, her voice cracking with panic, "there's been some kind of mistake. This is the woman I'm filing against." Sarah settled into her chair with the composed dignity of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire legal career. "Mrs. Palmridge, I am your Honor, and according to your petition, you have filed for a restraining order against a sitting municipal court judge." The courtroom exploded in whispers that the bailiff had to gavel down. Derek caught sight of the reporter frantically scribbling notes, probably composing the headline, "HOA President seeks restraining order against judge who lives next door." I didn't know," Karen whispered, sinking into her chair. "Ignorance of judicial identity is not a defense for filing false charges," Sarah replied, her voice carrying judicial authority. "However, since you have initiated these proceedings, we will examine your claims. Please present your evidence of stalking and intimidation." What followed was 15 minutes of the most beautiful legal destruction Derek had ever witnessed. Karen, her confidence completely shattered, stumbled through her prepared statement while Derek's evidence systematically demolished every claim. The security footage was devastating. Derek's cameras had captured Karen creating the very disturbances she'd reported, watering dead plants at 2 a.m., making noise near Derek's bedroom window, then filing complaints the next morning about the disturbances she'd caused herself. Betty Kowalski's audio recordings played for the packed courtroom, revealing Karen's threats to make them regret moving here, and her plans to drive them out using every resource at my disposal. The financial evidence showed Karen's systematic violation of the same HOA rules she'd used to persecute Derek, along with $15,000 in unreported rental income that would soon interest the IRS. But the coup de grace came when Sarah examined Karen's evidence of Derek's alleged stalking. Karen's professional-looking briefcase contained blurry cell phone photos taken through her bedroom window, illegally obtained property records, and a handwritten timeline of Sarah's suspicious late-night arrivals that perfectly matched her court schedule. Mrs. Palmridge, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of the entire court system. You have conducted surveillance of a judicial officer's private residence, obtained personal information through questionable means, and filed a petition containing multiple false statements under oath. Derek watched Karen's face cycle through the stages of legal grief: denial, bargaining, anger, and finally, dawning realization that she'd just committed several felonies in front of a packed courtroom. The court hereby denies your petition for a restraining order, Sarah continued, her gavel strikes echoing like gunshots. Furthermore, this matter is being referred to the district attorney's office for investigation of perjury, harassment of a judicial officer, and potential stalking charges against the petitioner. Let the record reflect that filing false charges against judicial officers represents not just harassment of individuals, but an attack on the judicial system itself, Sarah declared. Karen stumbled from the courtroom in tears, her designer briefcase abandoned, her 3 witnesses looking like they wanted to disappear. Outside, Derek told the reporter, Karen Palmridge spent 3 months trying to drive my wife and me from our home because she didn't think we belonged in her neighborhood. Turns out, she's the one who doesn't belong in ours. The story would run 3 days later, accompanied by photos of Karen's tearful exit and Derek's satisfied smile. But the real victory was watching justice served with cosmic irony, in a courtroom where the woman who'd tried to destroy their happiness was forced to face the consequences of her own hatred. The aftermath of Karen's courtroom humiliation rippled through Riverside Heights like a stone thrown into still water. Within 48 hours, she resigned as HOA president via a 2-sentence email blaming personal health issues. The Phoenix New Times story went viral with the headline, Judge Next Door, HOA President's Harassment Backfires in Epic Courtroom Showdown. The criminal consequences kept mounting. Karen pled guilty to filing false police reports, paying $1,200 in fines plus $3,200 in court costs. The IRS investigation Derek had triggered resulted in $8,500 in back taxes and penalties on her unreported rental income. Her illegal Airbnb operation was shut down by code enforcement, costing her $15,000 annually. At the emergency HOA meeting called to replace Karen, Derek was elected to the board by unanimous vote. His first motion established anti-harassment policies requiring evidence and due process before any fines could be issued. No more kangaroo court, Derek told the packed community center. The days of one person terrorizing families are over. The policy changes were comprehensive. The HOA budget became transparent with monthly reports available to all residents. Annual audits were instituted. Most importantly, a 3-person committee was established to review all violation notices, preventing future abuse. Derek's workers' compensation claim was finally approved after the false accusations were debunked, providing the financial breathing room his family desperately needed. His side electrical business grew as word spread about his technical expertise and problem-solving skills. Sarah's judicial career flourished, partly due to national attention her case received. She was invited to speak at judicial conferences about harassment of court officers, turning her experience into educational opportunities for other judges. The neighborhood transformation was remarkable. 3 families who'd moved away because of Karen's harassment actually returned. Tom Morrison organized a welcome committee for new residents. Betty Kowalski started a neighborhood watch program focused on actual safety rather than petty enforcement. Derek's most satisfying achievement was launching the Seniors Electrical Safety Program, offering free home inspections for elderly residents throughout Phoenix. The program prevented 12 house fires in its first year and saved 3 lives, earning recognition from the Phoenix Fire Department. Sarah established an HOA mediation program through municipal court, offering free conflict resolution before disputes escalated to legal action. The program reduced harassment cases by 70% and became a model adopted by 5 other municipalities. The financial settlement provided unexpected community benefits. Karen's $4,200 in violation payments funded new playground equipment she'd previously opposed, creating the community asset she'd fought hardest against with her own money. 6 months later, Derek received a call that made him smile. Another HOA victim from across town had heard about his victory. "I heard what you did to Karen Palmridge. Think you could help me with my situation?" Derek had become something he'd never intended, a neighborhood justice consultant, helping families fight HOA abuse across Phoenix. Sarah's mediation program was expanding statewide. Their marriage had grown stronger through shared adversity. Most importantly, they could finally enjoy their home in peace. No more police visits, violation notices, or surveillance. Their evenings were spent planning improvements, teaching Jake electrical skills, and dreaming about the future they'd almost lost to one woman's petty hatred. As Derek told the follow-up reporter 6 months later, "Karen thought she could drive us out because we didn't fit her vision of the perfect neighborhood. But it turns out the perfect neighborhood is one where bullies don't get to decide who belongs." The smell of sawdust still filled Derek's workshop, but now it mixed with the satisfaction of justice served and the promise of more battles won. Derek had learned something every HOA tyrant should fear. When you push the right person too far, they might just push back with the full force of the law. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. If you've got your own HOA nightmare story, drop it in the comments below. Which HOA president needs a reality check? And don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories where the little guy gets justice, because everybody loves a good underdog victory. 699 700 words within target. Job. Kim Tranozung. Fan Mui. Dedu climax by witnesses. Confrontation. Evidence reveal. Karen's downfall. Fan 11. Dedu consequences. Community benefits. Personal healing. Social good initiative. CTA logic. Jumuin flow vachitit kwantrang tu banguk. Word count. 819. Danchun. Vasauchan Baichum. Chingsak target.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.